So, what happens next in Syria? Even by the standards of the Middle East, the fall of the Assad regime is one of the most significant developments in recent years. After half a century of dictatorial rule, the country now faces a new future. However, apart from the profound internal effects, the changes could completely rewrite the geopolitical map of the wider region. Indeed, it may also help reshape international politics more generally. So, what are the main issues that we should be looking out for? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. In a previous video, I looked at the rise and fall of the Assad regime, which ruled Syria for over 50 years. In this one, I want to look at the current situation and think a bit about the central questions facing Syria in the period ahead. The Syrian civil war has been one of the most protracted and devastating conflicts of the 21st century. Emerging from the protests that swept through the Arab world in early 2011, the conflict initially favoured the various rebel factions. However, with Russian and Iranian support, the tide turned in Assad's favour. By 2020, the Syrian government had recaptured most of the country, apart from the northeast, which remained in Kurdish hands, and a small area in the northwest, which was under the control of several rebel groups, including Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, an organisation with Islamist roots. But while it may have appeared as if the war was all but over, the situation was changing on the ground. Having consolidated power in northwestern Syria, HTS began rearming. Meanwhile, broader international developments were shifting in its favour, with Russia preoccupied in Ukraine and Iran's ability to help undermined by Hezbollah's recent defeat in Lebanon. HTS saw its opportunity to strike against the Assad regime. In late November 2024, HTS launched a surprise offensive supported by various Turkish-backed rebel groups, including the Free Syrian Army. Using their new tactics and training, as well as advanced drone technology, the rebels rapidly overwhelmed government forces, which offered minimal resistance. Having swiftly captured key cities such as Aleppo, Homs and Hama, the capital, Damascus, fell to the opposition on December the 7th, forcing Bashar al-Assad to flee to Moscow. But while the overthrow of the regime was greeted with widespread jubilation within Syria, where the Assad regime had ruled with extreme brutality and has been widely welcomed internationally, it's also left Syria at a crossroads, with numerous questions about its future governance and foreign relations. The first question is whether the civil war is in fact over, or whether all this merely marks a new phase. While HTS may have emerged as the most prominent force, it's certainly not the only one. Aside from the ongoing battle against ISIS in the east of the country, HTS has a complex and often contentious relationship with other rebel factions, many of which have competing ideologies and aims. This could lead to tensions and even renewed fighting. In the worst-case scenario, this could see the country fragment, with areas coming under competing groups, a pattern seen elsewhere where long-standing rulers have been ousted. But assuming HTS can consolidate power, what direction will Syria take? Will it turn to democracy, or will one form of autocratic rule be replaced by another? So far, the signs appear favourable, with a transitional government appointed until March 2025. But there are also reasons for concern. HTS originally emerged as an offshoot of al-Qaeda. Under its leader, Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, it was known for its fundamentalist Islamist ideology. This has raised fears that it will try to impose rigid Islamic rule on Syria, with all the implications this could have internally and on the country's foreign relations. That said, seasoned observers have pointed out that HTS has appeared more moderate in recent years. As well as distancing itself from its al-Qaeda origins, it shifted away from the international Islamist battle and focused more on Syria, replacing pan-Islamism with a more nationalist tone. Moreover, observers noted that it focused on effective governance in the areas it did control before Assad fell. Nevertheless, there will be deep concerns about the ideological direction that Syria could take. A second related issue centres on what will happen to the country's ethnic and religious minorities. While Syria is predominantly Arab and Sunni Muslim, other communities exist. For example, Christians make up around 10% of the population. Will they be allowed to practice their faith freely and openly under the new administration, especially if it does pursue a hardline Islamist agenda? Then there's the Alawite community. Also comprising about 10% of the population, their position is now particularly precarious. As Alawites, the Assads had given the community a special place under the previous regime. Will they now face revenge attacks and potential institutionalised persecution in the longer term? But perhaps the most critical question is centred on the Kurds in the northeast of the country. During the civil war, various Kurdish groups, led by the Democratic Union Party, the PYD, and its military arm, the YPG, carved out a self-governing region. What will now happen to this? So far, the situation seems stable. The Kurds appear to have accepted the rebel victory, with reports that they've raised the new Syrian flag over the territory and have welcomed the opportunity to build a new Syria based on equality for all citizens. Nevertheless, they will want to maintain their autonomy. But will the new powers in Damascus try to bring the region back under central government control? Aside from reasserting national unity, the area has valuable oil reserves and agricultural land. But any move to end self-rule would face stiff Kurdish resistance. I hope you're finding this helpful. If so, please do consider giving it a like and perhaps subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. It all really helps. Thanks so much. And now, back to the video. Aside from the domestic implications, there are also questions about the effects on the wider region. Most obviously, there's the issue of relations with Israel. Israel and Syria have been arch enemies since the establishment of the Jewish state in 1948, with Syria joining other Arab states to attack Israel when it declared independence. This was followed by several more conflicts, including the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel seized and later illegally annexed the Golan Heights. Meanwhile, under the Assad regime, Syria supported anti-Israel militant groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. So, could this potentially change? In the short term, the answer is a clear no. For a start, following the fall of Assad, Israel quickly moved its forces into southwest Syria. At the same time, it's launched over 500 airstrikes on Syrian military sites to stop arms and equipment from falling into the hands of HTS and other groups. While all this has led to accusations that Israel has exploited the situation for its own ends and made any peace impossible, Israeli decision-makers will argue that this was never going to happen anyway, given HTS's background Islamist ideology. Although Israel was pleased to see the end of Assad, they weren't going to risk giving Syria's new rulers the benefit of the doubt. But looking ahead, the fact that Israel says its troops will remain in place for now suggests the possibility of a withdrawal if the conditions are right. The question is whether this could open the way for any dialogue in the future. But any final peace will inevitably hinge on the Golan Heights, which both see as vital territory. Then there are the questions relating to broader foreign policy. To start with, how will the new Syria engage with Russia and Iran, if at all? It's widely accepted that Moscow and Tehran are the two main losers from Assad's fall, having propped up the regime throughout the civil war. But are they both now insignificant? For Moscow, the loss of Assad is a blow on several levels. Apart from the embarrassment of losing a key ally in the Arab world, there are strategic implications. Russia's naval base in Tartus has been central to Moscow's power projections in the Mediterranean region, especially as Turkey has closed the exit from the Black Sea. Russia will no doubt do all it can to keep the base. This will give the new Syrian government considerable leverage. Likewise, Iran also faces significant challenges following the fall of the previous regime. As one of Assad's closest allies, Tehran expanded its regional influence by establishing military bases in Syria and used Syria to supply arms and assistance to Hezbollah in neighbouring Lebanon. However, HTS has historically been deeply opposed to Iran's influence. In addition to ideological differences between HTS's Sunni Islamist position and Iran's Shia theocracy, Tehran's support for Assad made them opponents during the civil war. For this reason, relations could well be icy. That said, it's not impossible to see a new relationship emerging, especially if Israel remains a common enemy. But beyond this, there are many other foreign policy unknowns. For example, what will Syria's relationship be with the wider Arab world? Many countries will be wary of its Islamist background and the possibility that it could become a haven for militant groups. Then again, many may see a chance to try to win over the new regime. Likewise, there's the question of relations with the West. The United States and the European Union have both previously designated HTS as a terrorist group. But will Washington and the European countries now see this as a chance to reach out to the new administration, or even vice versa? And how will the other respond? Again, the relationship with Israel may strongly affect all this. But arguably, the most interesting question concerns Turkey. Ankara and Damascus have long had a problematic relationship. However, having supported key rebel factions during the civil war, many see Turkey as potentially the primary geopolitical winner in recent events. Indeed, and significantly, it's been reported that the Turkish foreign minister and the head of the intelligence service have already visited Damascus for discussions. Looking ahead, Ankara will certainly hope to be able to influence the new administration. But will the new powers that be in Syria want to see that sort of relationship? And here too, the Kurdish issue looms large. Having long faced a challenge from Kurdish separatism within its own borders, Turkey vehemently opposes the existence of an autonomous Kurdish entity on its southeast border, especially as Ankara sees the PYD and the YPG as nothing more than offshoots of the Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK, which Turkey's been fighting on and off for 40 years. To this end, Turkey could well exert pressure on the new Syrian regime to curtail Kurdish autonomy. Failing this, it could remain in the country. Either way, this could also complicate relations. Of course, it's too early to draw firm conclusions on any of these questions. Moreover, any decision taken on one issue could profoundly affect other areas. For example, opposition to Israel may trump tensions with Tehran, or the desire for pragmatic relations with Europe may see the complete severing of ties with Russia. In this sense, a lot will be riding on the decisions taken in the next few weeks, months and years. In the meantime, what can be said for certain is that the fall of the Assad regime marks a monumental turning point for the Middle East. The question now is which direction Syria will face. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.